Hello, welcome to the fourth episode of Theology Taco. My name is Tim and I am your host. I had already recorded this episode last week on Wednesday, I believe it was, but I wasn't very thrilled with it. And then the following 2 days I was at the Global Leadership Summit, which was hosted by Willow Creek Association out of Illinois. And I guess you could say it had a pretty big impact on me, and I wanted to cover that here on this podcast. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to include the original stuff that I was going to talk about last week, the two questions that were asked of me, and then I'm going to talk about personhood in the church. So the Global Leadership Summit, it was suggested to me that I should go, so I attended. And leadership for me is not is not something that I have dealt with a lot in the past. I'm very new to leadership, and I kind of stumbled into it. The more I studied and prepared to enter into ministry, and the more I got into discipleship, the more I found out that leadership was going to be something that I would take part in. And the Global Leadership Summit, all of the speakers and all the resources presented to me was very helpful in starting me down that path. But of course, since the Global Leadership Summit is such a large event, especially here in the United States, I think they said like 130,000 people in the U.S. alone would be participating in the event. There was a fair amount of a controversy revolving around it, especially that could be seen on Twitter. But a lot of people like to complain on Twitter, myself included. So I'm not just throwing shade at other people. Anyways, the controversy is, one, some of it I don't understand completely because this was my first year. Some of the criticism said that there was it promotes a hierarchical view of leadership in the church. Maybe in past summits that could be seen, but I didn't really get a sense of it in this year's event. And then the main controversy, I guess, is surrounding more of the Willow Creek Association, who founded this event. Willow Creek Church in Illinois, their founder or their head pastor, Bill Hybels, was accused of sexual misconduct by 3 different women. He originally denied the claims, and then he kind of backpedaled. He didn't admit, but I'll let you look into that for yourself and come to your own conclusion. But then the whole board of elders of the Willow Creek Church, they also resigned because they didn't treat the investigation into these claims too seriously, and then they apologized, and I guess this is their way of repenting. And so I get it, because real people are affected by this. You know, Willow Creek Church, the church isn't the building, church is the people. So there are real people affected by this whole controversy on each side. The church is made up of real people. But I guess, that being said, there are enough people that attend Willow Creek Church who felt that the Global Leadership Summit was worth still putting on, still facilitating the summit. So I understand that part of the criticism, because the stakes are so high, and real people have their trust abused, and the power was abused, and abusing power is sinful. As one of the speakers said at this year's conference, abusing power is sinful. That was Craig Groeschel who said that. And then I saw a few other criticisms that kind of bothered me. One of the criticisms said that the leaders who put it on, or even the speakers, and the people or leaders who attend, were narcissistic. But I think they said that without regarding the content of the presentations or the character of the presenters. Because when I attended and when I was watching and listening to presenters, I didn't get that feeling. I didn't get that these were people that were narcissists. I think that these were people who leadership, they didn't stumble into it, but it fell on them, and they were people who really looked into leadership and like what worked and how can we be better leaders, how can we treat people better. So I didn't think that criticism was fair, but I don't know, maybe I'm secretly a narcissist. And also, the summit wasn't just meant for pastors of churches. That was another criticism lobbed at the Global Leadership Summit. Like, they're training all of these pastors to create a corporate structure out of the church. But I think that what they are forgetting is that many Christians who make up the church have positions of leadership outside of the church. Like, many of them are business owners. Maybe some of them are managers at a store or a restaurant like moi. And so they just wanted good resources that can help them be a better leader who cares about winning. It's more about just being a better person. It's being a better servant. So I thought that criticism wasn't a very good one. And another criticism that I saw was that the Global Leadership Summit doesn't lift up small pastors. Like, someone said that they would rather have the Global Leadership Summit be a panel of pastors of churches that are really small. And frankly, I think that would be neat for a Global Leadership Summit to highlight some of those pastors. But I don't think anyone is saying that pastors of small churches are bad leaders or that they aren't worthwhile. In fact, if you look on the bookshelf of a pastor of a small church, chances are you might find a biography or autobiography of a leader that they very much admire and who they want to learn from, and they might apply some of those leadership skills that they found in those books. So I think that was a little bit of a stretch for that criticism. And the reason why these people got picked to speak at the Global Leadership Summit is something I mentioned earlier, is that they found themselves in the role of leader, and they said, I wonder what, I could say, here I am, but I wonder what really makes this work. And so they analyzed what makes leadership work. They broke it down, and then they disseminated it to their audience so that it was something that we can understand and something that we can apply. It's not about one of the things that I like that Simon Sinek said is that we aren't in a role of leadership to win. We're in the role of leadership to I guess outlast, or just to be in it. He related it to something called the infinite game. And so we're not in it to win. We're in it to last as long as we can, and we can't last long if we're treating people like they're garbage. And it meant a lot for me to attend because, like I said, it's very encouraging to me. It was very neat to have all of those resources available from people that were in the business world who identified roles of leadership that didn't sound all businessy but sounded very practical that I could apply in my own life and in my own role of not ministry but of leadership. So yeah, that's me. That's my hot take on the Global Leadership Summit. Now, back to my original topic. Personhood in the church. Well, I've got something to say about that, but first I wanted to get to the question and answer. And I gave them 80s cartoon character names so that I could protect their identity. The first one comes from a family member of mine, and I'm going to name her Rainbow Bright. And she asks, what was the motivation to do the podcast in the first place? And I think that's a very good question. It's something that I had to think about for a little bit, but I'm going to answer that later. Sorry, Rainbow Bright. And the second question that I will actually be addressing first comes from Egon. And he asks, is there a better or less risky option between non-denominational and specific denominational churches? I'm assuming he's asking if there's something in between those that you can attend. And I think that's a great question. And I think a lot of people have tried to come up with an alternative to denominational churches and non-denominational ones that's had mixed results. The one that I'm thinking of right now is the emergent church movement, which it's something that emphasizes bringing back the practice of ancient Christian mysticism and focuses on activism, and it also focuses on a narrative interpretation of Scripture. And really, these are people who are tired of philosophy of modernism that had been so prevalent in the church up until maybe the 1990s or early 2000s. And so they favor a postmodern philosophy, but they're really just swapping out one philosophy for another, and both aren't that great. And it can kind of get a little goofy because I was reading one story about an emergent church where a pastor ordered a whole bunch of sand so that it could be spread about the sanctuary floor, and so that the congregants would feel closer to the first century Christians. In my opinion, that's kind of a waste of money. But another thing is that they don't have the emergent church doesn't have a very good hold on Christian doctrine. Well, they didn't used to anyways. That could have changed recently. So is there really a good alternative? I would say not, only because denominational churches, they offer a bit of structure and doctrinal stability, and they have people who hold the pastors accountable. Like they have bishops that are overseeing a region of the denomination. And then with non-denominational churches, they don't necessarily have that kind of accountability, but the congregation does have a little bit more of a say of what goes on in the church. And if you dig down deep on a non-denominational church's website, they have a very specific set of what they believe. So if you try to go for something in between, you might find something that's pretty ambiguous or even a little cultish, and that can be kind of scary and kind of confusing. So let's get to my family member's question. Rainbow Bright, she asked, what was the motivation behind the podcast? Well, Rainbow Bright, that's a good question with a few different answers. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this podcast is because it's a creative outlet for me. I spent a lot of time earning my degree, and because I don't really have a professional setting right now to use my degree, I needed something to channel that creative energy and everything that I've learned and what I'm passionate about onto a platform that could reach an audience. And the second reason is, and this may sound weird to some people, but I really love editing things together. I get to do that to a podcast where I can edit together music, narration, and other audio clips into something that hopefully is cohesive. And believe me, I do a lot of editing because there's a lot of So yeah. The third reason is sort of related to the first. The more I study the Bible and the more I read theological works, the more I feel the urge to tell people about it. I think there's a ton of fascinating things about faith that people pass over. And me creating a podcast is a way to bring these things to other people to try to get them to think twice about something. Some people might call that ministry. I want to do it in a fun way, though, with some quirky things thrown in to make people laugh, because that might keep their interest for the full episode. But I also love to make people laugh. And I guess, the reason why I call it Theology Taco is because of no reason at all. I think that it's quirky. I guess it's because maybe I'm a millennial and I really like tacos. But actually, my wife came up with the name. She came up with the taco part. Originally, I was going to call it Theology Pizza, because anybody who knows me knows that I'm basically a fat Ninja Turtle and I love pizza. But Theology Taco has the alliteration, and I really like tacos, except for shrimp tacos. And I had to, and it's sort of an embrace of myself. I had to get to a place that I've only started to get to recently, where I'm comfortable being myself, even if that's being a little goofy, or even if people my age think it's a little immature. I want to have fun, and I want to have fun talking about serious things in the church. Talking about faith, Christian faith, and theology is serious. But let me tell you something. A Christian is also supposed to be joyful. And I think humor, quirkiness, being just, comfortable with who God is making you to a certain extent is a reflection of what joy is. And I think I'm embracing my gifts and being obedient to God through embracing my gifts. And I think that is springboards into my next point, which was to talk about personhood. And what is personhood exactly? The Westminster Dictionary of Theological Terms defines it as that which expresses one's self as a person. And the person is an individual substance of a rational nature. Personhood highlights that an individual is capable of reason and expression. The idea of personhood hasn't always played well in the church. Sometimes the gifts or expression of the individual were minimized for the sake of serving God. As my wife was talking about on the last episode of the podcast, there was, and sometimes still, this attitude that you can't have God in education. So it's basically God or nothing. It's either you serve God or you chase after your gifts, which leaves you down a dark path. And I don't believe that, because I believe God gave you gifts for a reason, to use them and to use them to serve Him, but also because you take joy in what He's given you. And an example of this comes from the life of the Olympian Eric Liddell, whose story was turned into a movie called Chariots of Fire. Maybe you've heard the soundtrack. It goes dun 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 dun. That was terrible. Sorry. Anyways, during his time in the Olympics, Eric was training to be a missionary in China. And during his training in the Olympics, or his preparation in the Olympics, his sister, who was going to join him on his mission trip to China, came and confronted him and was like, "Yo, you're doing too much of this. You're not serving God. You're more focused on running." However, Eric said something to her during that conversation that really kind of puts personhood in its place in relation to the Bible and serving God. he said, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Personhood in the church then recognizes our talents are God-given. Psalm 139, 13 through 14, which is one of my favorite verses, says, For you created my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. Personhood not only recognizes our talents are God-given, but are to be used, and when used, can be considered being obedient to God. In fact, we should use our talents to serve God because it shows the variety of ways, the diversity, I should say, that God gifts us with. Also in Romans 12, Paul writes, So in Christ, though many form one body, and each member belongs to all the others, we have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy in accordance with your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is giving, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. And Peter also backs this up. In 1 Peter 4:10, he says, God has given each of you a gift from his great variety of spiritual gifts. Use them well to serve one another. So, listen, you want to call it talent? I think that's a gift from God. As it said in Psalm 139, he knit you together. You discover you have a talent. I think that's a gift from God. In fact, I think he can increase it. He can add on to it. Like we find the blacksmiths in the book of Numbers. They already had a skill, and God put the Holy Spirit on them, and then they started creating all this wonderful stuff for the tabernacle. So if you're an athlete, you're a swimmer, runner, whatever, you can use that to serve God, because I think he put that talent, that gift into you to run and to swim, to do the shot put, javelin, whatever. And you can use that to serve God. That's a great, effective tool for witnessing. And if the same goes if you're an artist. I have a niece-in-law, I should say, who's a great artist. And she uses her art to help women who have been abused by sex trafficking or in human trafficking. And I think a few other ministries. She donates all the proceeds to from her commission pieces. In fact, the artist that designed the logo for this podcast, he attends my church, and he owns a business called 723 Creative, and he helps out our church a lot with all of our graphic design needs. And then another way I've seen gifts applied is, so during the summer we had this special Sunday called Communicator Sunday, where a bunch of people were picked by the pastoral staff to get up and give a short speech, sermonette, or testimony to the church. And I was one of those people, thankfully. But one of the speakers really caught my attention with the way that she applies her gifts. So she rescues dogs, and it is her conviction that God placed a burden on her heart to rescue dogs and or train them or bring them back from a point in their life where people thought those dogs might not make it, and she nursed them back to health. There was this one dog that she had who was just like on death's door, and she nursed that dog back to health. In fact, she used the passage in Romans 12 as to support her conviction that she uses the variety of gifts, especially this gift, to serve God. She believes she's being a good steward to God's creations, and I think and I agree with her. And so personhood is just the church, okay? we need to nurture these gifts, and we need to encourage people to use them to not only serve God but serve each other. It's not, an arm can't be a foot, the kneecap can't be a neck. We're all different, and yet we're all part of one body, and all of our different parts of the body are what make the body function. And so we have to get to this place, and I think we've gotten there a lot better recently, of where we need to encourage this to happen, because that edifies the body, of course, but then people outside the faith are paying attention, and they're looking at us and saying, wow, that's a creative group of people, and we want to know more. And so it's a way of witnessing to other people. So I guess I'm going to cut it there. Next week, I won't say next week because it takes me longer than a week. I'm going to try to talk about grace, and something that caught my attention in Ephesians 4 about grace. So, yep. God bless. Have a good night. And have a good weekend, whenever you're listening to this. Why haven't I shut this off yet?